Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this Satori Software webinar, Political Mailings. It is the season for political mailings. Before we get started, I'd like to cover just a couple of very quick housekeeping items. First off, if you're into social media, and so Bob, you have some new hashtags, don't you? You're very popular on Twitter these days.
Yes, thanks.
If you're into social media like Bob is, and you're accumulating followers at the same rate he is, of course, you'll probably want to communicate with Satori Software, and you can do so via Twitter. That's where you'll find Bob and his new hashtags and new followers. You'll also find Satori Software on LinkedIn and on Facebook. The various handles, well, the handles should be pretty straightforward, and I'm sure you can search for Bob's new ones. Those are some pretty good ones we got going on. All right, fine, Bob. I thought you'd enjoy that more. I'm Rob Perrin, the Director of Multimedia Marketing for Satori Software, and I will be your host today. Joining me are Kim Mock, Senior Product Manager for Satori Software, and the Product Owner for pretty much all things mailing at Satori Software.
A couple of them.
Yeah. Welcome back, Kim.
Thanks.
And you were on vacation too, weren't you? So
That's
this is fresh, back in first thing Monday morning for you.
That's right. Yep.
Fantastic. And of course, Bob Shimmick, Senior Director of Postal Affairs and host of our Postal Affairs program on Monday mornings.
That is right.
Hi,
Good morning.
Bob. And you're actually in town. Normally you're out on the road. So we've got
Yes.
the both of you actually here live in the studio.
Rare event.
A very rare event. And today we are going to be talking about political mailing, and very timely, of course. We're headed into that season, and there's a lot of things we want to talk about here. We want to talk a little bit about specifics, things, introductions to political mailings. We want to talk a little bit about what makes a political mailing, what a political mailing piece looks like. There's a lot of regulations and rules, aren't there, Bob? I saw
Correct.
you carrying around that was an abridged version of the DMM,
Right.
I assume.
You're right. It was a guide.
A guide, yeah, it was only 30 pages instead of
Right.
3,000. So carrying that around, Kim's going to talk a little bit about all the cool things you need to know and some stuff about Satori Software and how our products apply to political mailings.
That's right.
We will summarize what we've talked about and then some next steps at the end in case you want to get into the whole political mailing thing. So, Bob, I think you started these slides. Design pieces, they're very specific about this, aren't they? Lots of rules.
They are. But at the same time, there are a number of options available for mailers. And so before we dive into a whole lot of detail around here too, the thing to keep in mind is, at least within this type of these types of mailings, there's two categories underneath here that we're going to be talking about. One is election mailings, and election mailings, as you can see here on this slide, is more geared towards, for example, official ballots. There are a number of different states, for example, that have adopted a vote by mail.
Sure.
Some of them, I believe, like Washington State, is pretty much all vote by mail.
Right.
Well, our King County is. I don't
King
know
County
that
is,
Washington
okay.
State as a whole has adopted it, but it's
Yeah.
King County where we are currently. They are all vote by mail. There's not even polling places anymore.
Correct. And so this is used to identify the ballots. And then there is campaign mailings, or also referred to as political mailings, where you're sharing information about a particular person, and there is a lot of flexibility there as far as
So
what can
election
be-
mail would be something that a municipality, a state or a county or a city might send out: ballots, voter pamphlets, that kind of thing.
True.
It's
Yes.
the broad distribution stuff.
Right.
And then what we're going to be talking about today is primarily oriented around, so if you're a campaign manager or you're a candidate or you're someone who is managing a referendum or some sort of the things that end up in the election mailings.
Correct. And
Okay.
and for our customers that would potentially be doing this within the software, there's the ability to support both kinds.
Gotcha.
Whether or not you're working with a local municipality to do an election mailing, or you're working with a local candidate to do a political mailing. And so
Perfect.
one of the things that, at least at this point in time, all the national candidates are getting all the spotlight in the news, but really, it's the more state, local candidates that really use mail as a very strong tool as a part of their election campaign, and this can be a very important component of their overall mailing strategy for getting reelected or elected in the first place.
Sure. And we've all seen the multi-piece mailings that come that talk a little bit about candidates and things that they're doing. We've seen there's a ton of options available here.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the identification of election mail, the Postal Service has identified they allow up to 3. You can use one of 3 different colors on the mail piece itself. As you can see, that's black, blue, and red. I think it's probably used to identify the various political parties.
I was just going to ask if that was affiliated with anything.
I am guessing that is likely the case. And so, there's 3 options for being able to put it on.
It's important that your tie be the right color, isn't it?
That is, yes, very much so. And then also, the color of the print, and then the wave in the background is controlled at, as it's noted, the regulations is 40% of coverage. And so there are rules around exactly how this would look on the mail piece. And so when you actually see it placed on the piece, depending on the type of piece that you're mailing, and these can vary, some could be sending out a postcard, some could be sending out a letter, others it can be a flat. And so depending on what you're doing, there are different ways in which that logo can appear on the actual mail piece. And so some things that everyone needs to be aware is, the placement there is essentially in the middle of the piece between the return address and the indicia and or stamp, and you cannot have anything above it. With the postcard example, there is the FIM marks above it, but that's, a postal marking indicator that goes there for orientation of the piece. And then the other important thing is a clear zone, not around the logo itself, but then also keeping in mind that you also have to maintain clear zone around, for example, the address and those things that would continue to apply to mail pieces that are being done regardless of whether or not it's a political mailing or just a regular mailing. And so those are examples of, the right way to do it. But then there is also, the Postal Service offers some suggestions on these would also be the wrong way to do it and not allowed. So you don't want it.
So the rules around this, are they this picky? Is this primarily because machines need to be able to process this, and the more consistency there is to it, the easier it is to process?
Yeah, typically what you would, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think the assumption here is that this would usually be sent as automation compatible mailing. But, I think when we get a little bit later in the slide deck, we're also going to talk a little bit about saturation mailings. Mm-hmm. And then with saturation mailings, those do not go through automation equipment. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be automation compatible. It kind of depends on what your goal is. And we'll get into some of those details a little bit further down the road.
Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to note that, especially with election mail, even though it's marked generally as a normal first class piece, it is actually handled differently at the post office, because obviously they want to make sure that anything that has to do with making sure people have their voter cards, or making sure that they have their ballots on time, or making sure that the municipality or whatever gets their ballots back in time and they can get everything counted up. They tend to expedite the election mail a little bit more, to pay a little bit more attention to it, and so marking it appropriately is very important.
That certain time sensitivity to election-oriented things.
Exactly.
Time can run out.
Yep, exactly.
And one thing to be very clear about, what we're talking about here is these, the rules around using this marking on your physical mail piece. If you're looking to qualify for automation discounts, all that stuff, all those rules that everyone is familiar with day in, day out still apply equally here as well, depending on, what type of mail piece you're looking to send out. This is just kind of an additional over and above step for marking it.
And I presume there are rules that state that you can't use this marking for non-election mails as well.
True, right. And so this marking is really specific to election mail and not necessarily political or campaign type mail.
So if I put this on my sweepstakes mails, that would be bad.
Yeah, that would not go over well. And I'm guessing you would probably have some trouble at acceptance. And so as we go back here and look at the different options where they're saying, these are the incorrect way to be using it, you can see essentially, there are examples where it's interfering with the address block area, which needs to stay clear, or maybe interfering with the postage payment area or in the upper right-hand corner. And so those are the things that they're making sure that you avoid doing. So now, after you get your mail piece designed, whether you're doing a political mailing or an election mailing, there is also, as Kim kind of alluded to, there is a special way of noting and identifying the sacks and trays of mail that you will be submitting that contain the campaign mailing or the election mail information. And so these are the two different types of tags. And so there's the red tag, which is tag 57, that you would put on your sacks and trays of any campaign mailing that you would be looking to do. And these tags you would get from your local post office. And so the expectation here is that these tags your local post office will have on stock and available to you. So one thing I would recommend is if you're looking to be doing a lot of campaign mailing and get an idea of potentially how many sacks, trays that are going to be part of this mailing, and then notify your post office ahead of time and just make sure they have sufficient quantities of these available. Because one of the things you do want to do, in addition to, for example, the sack tag and tray tag, you will still put that on those containers the same way you're doing today, but this is an additional one that goes on it that really ensures that expedited handling. And Postal Service is very sensitive to these types of mailings and making sure that they do not get delayed and they move through the system as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Right.
When Kim was on vacation, we should have decorated her office with tag 57s.
Yeah, get a couple of thousand of those, yeah. And so, as we head into the mailing season, the Postal Service is pretty good about keeping these in sufficient stock and quantity. But obviously, especially with the political mail, the red tag definitely is eye-catching for the postal employees that are processing. And, during the heavy campaign mailing seasons, the employees get very used to looking for those and making sure that they get expedited handling. The other component of when you are doing these types of mailings is also identifying that this is a political mailing or an election mailing on the postage statement. And so what I wanted to call out here is where you would find that information on the postage statement. And as we continue to get more and more automated with full service, there's a lot less actual hands-on work with an actual postage statement because it gets all communicated through electronic documentation. But one thing to note is there is an option in the software, which we'll get to later, that allows you to identify whether or not you're doing a campaign mailing or an election mailing. And so the first one is the first class 3600, where you can see that there is two different check boxes there. And one is to whether identify it as a campaign mailing, in which you get that red tag. The expectation would be sacks and trays would have the red tag, or if it's an official election mailing, which would be like the ballot information, and then that would have the green tag. And so first class has both those available. If you're looking at standard mail, though, you'll see that the only thing there is political campaign mailing. And so ballots and that kind of stuff has to be sent first class mail. It part of being close to inspection and just making sure it's addressed to the individual. But for a campaign mailing, you can do you can mail it as standard mail. And the other thing that the Postal Service calls out too is depending on who it is, these political mailings, if you're mailing them standard mail, can also potentially qualify for nonprofit pricing. So it can be a very efficient and effective method of communicating out to the people that you want to have voting for you. And so on the postage statements, there is a spot located where the box will get checked to identify this, because the Postal Service also does track the amount of volume of mail related to campaign mailings and political mailings. And so it's interesting, though, in the two different forms, they show up in different locations of the postage statement. So on the first class one, there is a postage block area, and you'll see it there in the little snip snippet of it that's called out. But in the standard form, it's actually in the mailing section where it identifies it as a campaign mailing. But those would be the two spots that you would see it identified on the postage statement as well. And the acceptance clerks, if you're using the tags, would be looking for the alignment between these boxes being checked and the tags that you are using.
Right.
All right, Kim, so you're going to take over here and talk a little bit about how our products help feed into this.
Right. So the interesting thing, if you're a campaign manager, or if you're managing a referendum or some other type of a voted on item that you'd like to
Bob
advertise.
Shimmick for president.
Right, something like that. So there are a couple different things that you'll need to look at. So if you're doing, if you're a campaign manager, or you're working on an election initiative, you're not going to be maybe you're not as into the mailing flow as someone who maybe does this every single day. So there are different things that you can do.
Mailing is complicated. There's people who do it every single day, and they begin to memorize the regulations that apply, like Bob has done and like you have done. But if you're a campaign manager, you have other things to worry about.
Right.
So we worry about the mailing part for you, because every 4 years you need to do a mailing, or
every 2, depending on where you're at, right?
Yeah.
And so what we did was we kind of compiled a list of the things to look for. And so this could be when you're shopping around for a mailing solution, or if you're looking for a print service provider or someone to work with, you'll want to ask them about their capabilities to make sure that they're going to have all the capabilities that you're going to have to make your mailing as effective as possible. As with any advertising, there's going to be a cost involved, right? So there's postage, there's the paper, the ink, there's everything that goes into it. And so you want to make the most effective bang for your buck, right? You want to have that targeted mailing that's really going to do the best impact and get the most votes for whatever your issue is for the day. So we kind of put together this list of things that you'll need to consider when you're putting together an a campaign mailing. So this is mostly kind of centered on the campaign side. For election mail, it's a little bit more straightforward. You have your list of voters, you send that out. But when you're doing campaign mailings, you can do some really interesting things. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to need to consider, who am I actually going to be sending out this out to? You're going to need some type of a mailing list, or you're just going to need an area that you're going to want to blanket. So if you're just going to be sending something to everybody in a certain zip code because they all are voting for Proposition 1 or whatever it is, then you can kind of blanket that entire area. The next thing you'll want to consider is the different address quality things that are available to you. Can you do address correction? Can you update your addresses that have moved? What additional data can you attach to your mailing addresses? And then what capabilities do you have for refining that list after you've kind of implemented all those other pieces? Then of course you'll need to pre-sort. That's what's going to get you those discounts. That's going to, if you qualify for the nonprofit discounts, those are substantially lower than any other rate that's available from the post office. So you can get some really good impact there if you're eligible for that nonprofit rate. And then the next step, of course, is printing. So there's the whole idea of what variable data printing capabilities do you have available, and some of those can be achievable with a pretty low price point as far as a software package goes. So let's kind of dive into these a little bit more in detail. The first thing is to consider, who am I mailing to? So am I going to be targeting a county? Do I have a specific political party that I'm going to be looking after? Am I maybe going to market to the opposite political party? So maybe you might send a different piece to people who are a little bit more sympathetic to your views than you would someone who's not. And so maybe you have 2 different pieces that are going to the same area, but based on what party they've selected, you might give them a different message, and that can be kind of an interesting way to kind of sway the vote a little bit there. So you might want to look at any of the lists that you have through your registered party. Or all of the above. Or all of the above. And so you can take multiple lists from different locations, combine them, see where maybe there are some overlaps, and or if you just want to blanket an area, you'll want to make sure that you have the targeted zip codes that would apply to to the area that you're wanting to blanket. So you'll get that information, and then you would be able to take that information into a software package. And so here at Satori Software, we have some software packages that can kind of work through the rest of the steps after you have that mailing list acquired there. So the first thing you're going to want to look at is the addresses themselves. So if you have an address list that's not just a zip code that you're wanting to blanket, you're going to want to make sure that the addresses are complete, correct, and current. And this is kind of a mailing term that kind of you'll see a lot in the mailing space, but if you're an election manager, you might not be familiar with that. And basically, you're going to want to make sure that all of the parts of the address are complete. So if it's Main Street, it actually has street listed there instead of avenue, things like that. Making sure that the address is correct so that there actually is a physical place that you're mailing to. And then also that the address is current. So if you have names and addresses, you're going to want to make sure that that person is still at that address. So if they've moved outside of your county and that proposition or that initiative is no longer going to apply to you, to those people, then you'll want to filter those out of your mailing. So the things you'll want to look for address quality is you definitely want to look at CAS certified software. There's a list of CAS certified software that's a way that the USPS validates an address correction module in a software package. So there are all different kind of algorithms that are out there, but the CAS certified ones are the ones that have been tested by USPS, and they're going to give you the best results.
And I'm assuming Satori software products are CAS certified by the USPS.
Indeed. So there's a list of those vendors that is available on the USPS website, and Satori Software has been on there for, I think, well over 2 decades now. So I think pretty much since CAS certification started. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you're working with a valid software package. And so that's going to standardize your address. The next thing to kind of look at is what are the different ways that you can kind of fill out the extra information. So there is the USPS certification, but there are some additional bits of information that aren't available in the USPS data. And one of the interesting ones that's not available in the USPS data is apartment information. So if you have, John Smith and he's at 123 Main Street, but 123 Main Street is actually an apartment, there isn't a way with USPS to append what his apartment number is. However, there are some services that are outside USPS that are available through software packages like Satori Software that we can actually take a look at that combination of the name and the address, and we can find out what that apartment number is and append it. And that just gives that extra level of deliverability for that mail piece.
Spooky.
It's really nice because then you have a little bit more assurance that this is going to get
Sure.
to John Smith. And especially if you are doing something that maybe is a little bit more targeted towards one political party or the other, then it can be really important to make sure that you're getting that message to the right person because you don't want to piss them off. So
Dear Resident just doesn't have the same impact, does it?
it doesn't, and we're really finding that that having those targeted messages are really becoming the most impactful, not just in political mail, but just in any mail piece.
And I would expect that campaign managers have a budget that they have to watch. I haven't been one, but I would assume that there is a budget they need to watch, and as a result, every penny counts. The money just doesn't doesn't grow on trees. So you're going to want to target, there's printing costs, and then there's targeting costs as well, so postage. So you can't afford to just shotgun it out there and hope the right person reads it.
Right. Especially depending on what your message is. If you've got a really strongly worded message,
you want to make sure offend the wrong person.
You want to make sure that you're getting the message to the right person.
Dear Kim.
Yep,
gotcha.
exactly. So the next thing to think about is also making sure that those addresses are current. So 17% of the country moves every single year. This is
Really?
It's a very mobile country.
I had no idea. That's a huge number.
It is a huge number. And so even if you have a list that's a year old, the degradation in that data is really high. So what you'll want to do is you want to make sure that you run through processes that are going to keep your addresses current. So if John Smith moved from 123 Main Street and he moved, across the state or across the country, you're going to want to know that because you'll change your message. If it's a national campaign, maybe you'll change the message, or if it's a local campaign, you may want to exclude them completely because they don't care about referendum 1 in their old county anymore. So So there are a couple ways that you can update that move information. One is certified by USPS. It's called NCOA link. That stands for National Change of Address, and it's basically a database of all those little move address forms
Sure.
that you fill
Those
out
things
when
you
you
fill
move.
out when you move. Mm-hmm.
The trouble is a lot of people actually aren't filling those out anymore, especially the younger generation. They're not actually filling those out. They don't think about the post office when they move anymore. And so there are additional services like our ECOA, which would allow you to get additional move information that's not reported to USPS. So this would be things like utilities or magazine subscriptions. There are databases out there that you can access to get that information that's not available from USPS. So that'll give you that complete picture of all the moves. You can make sure that all the addresses that are in your list are going to be serving your initiative, or what or your political party.
So it's
right?
NCOA plus then.
Yeah. So we definitely recommend that you run both, because both of them are going to have different data sets, and so you get the complete picture when you apply both of them.
And one thing to keep in mind with NCOA is the Postal Service offers two different options. There's an 18-month option and a 48-month option. And so if this is a list, for example, that has sat idle since the last election 2 years ago, you may want to be sure to run it with the 48-month data to make sure you catch
everything that happened,
all the possible
sure.
moves that have occurred since then. And so one of the things we can say is, Satori is a 48-month provider, and that is one of the things that we can make sure that we take care of and catch for you.
Cool.
So after you've got your address complete, correct, and current, you may want to append additional data. And depending on which software you look at, there's several different types of additional data that you can add. You can add geographic data, including census information and congressional district information. You can append information about whether an address is a residence or a high-rise. That can allow you to filter. You can also append walk sequence information, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit later, just a little bit about pre-sorting and the different discounts that you can get with walk sequence processing. So that's a really good way to lower your postage cost. If you only have the addresses, you can also append head of household data. So if you have just the address, you can get what the primary head of household's contact name is. And then you can also append information like deceased processing, correctional addresses, correctional facilities like a jail or what have you, and also do not mail.
No point in mailing to any of those with a political mailing, is there?
Yeah. You definitely the people at correctional facilities, I don't believe are going to be as apt to vote. So
probably not getting out to the polling place anytime in the near future.
Right. So you'll want to look at the additional data that you can add to your data to really flesh out the full view of everything that you're looking at there. Then the next thing you're going to want to do is take all of this data and figure out, okay, I have all this information. What is going to be my targeted list going to look like? Am I looking at specific demographic information? Am I looking for a specific a political party? Am I looking for a specific geographic area? And what you can do is you can take all this information and filter it down to a specific targeted list that you'll be able to sort, and then you'll be able to prepare that mailing specific for that group and really create the largest impact for your mailing there.
So this does have the potential to be pretty powerful. Your list could be very complicated. It could be a very big list, and you're going to want to narrow it down depending upon multiple variables. So this isn't something that you hand to an intern and you have them do with a red pencil. There could be a lot of complexity to targeting a mailing.
Right. And there are definitely some service providers that are out there who are very adept at doing political mail. So if you're not willing to take that on, if you're a small shop, then definitely look for a software, is either a software package that's going to make it easy for you, or look for a service provider that's going to be able to walk that through that and have all this capability available to them.
Right. And I think it's important, if we go back in time and look at, some of the mailings that we've seen in the past, it was probably a more common approach in the past to really target just a general geographic area. If it's a congressional district or, a particular city area or whatever. But, what we are finding, in the mailing industry as a whole is the better you understand your customer and tailor the message specific to them, the better the response you're going to get from them. And that can apply equally to political mailings. And so, understanding, for example, what their declared party is could very much allow you to change how the messaging associated with that particular mail piece. And instead of just sending a generic mail piece to an entire blanketed area, really starting to create targeted messages for, based on all this additional information that you have about the person that you're attempting to communicate with.
Well, at the very minimum, it doesn't make any sense to blanket mail an entire zip code at this point. You'd want to blanket mail perhaps the registered voters in a particular zip code.
Right.
And that's even the simplest case. But then at that point, as you mentioned, you might want to go after political party. You might want to go after how recently they voted. You might want to go after, there's any number.
Or a certain demographic that you want to appeal to. Yeah.
Yep. Only the people who agree with Kim's point of view on this, or the people who agree with Bob's point of view on this.
Right.
This could be very complicated.
Yep. And being able to create that final filtered list really creates the most impactful advertising, and it's the best bang for your spending buck. So.
Cool. And of course, Satori stuff. With the Satori products, we can do this.
Yeah. So we have several options that are available, and some that are all in one package that you can walk through. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of the next step, which is all about the dollars, right? So postage is definitely one of the highest costs when it comes to mailing. And so there are different ways that you can prepare your mail for political mailing. You can use standard mail. If you qualify as a nonprofit, you can actually get that nonprofit rate, which is going to be your best rate that's available. And for some mailings, you will want to send them first class. Sometimes, especially if you're appealing to maybe a donors list or something like that, being able to specifically target them and get them engaged with first class mail can be really effective.
So, Bob, you're a nonprofit, right? But you sort of became one inadvertently.
No, I'm not.
Okay, just checking.
So one of the things that's really, especially for political mail, that's really a good way to maximize your postal dollar is to apply walk sequence saturation rates. So this is if you're going to be mailing the majority of people in a specific targeted area. And what you would need to do in order to get those rates is to apply walk sequence numbers. And products like our bulk mailer product and some of our other products that we have here at Satori will append that number for you, and then you'll be able to achieve those really low postage rates.
Walk sequence, that's basically the order that something's going to be delivered in. So you're putting your mail into the order that the person on the street, the mail carrier, is actually going to hand it out. So they just take the next one and put it in the box, and take the next one and put it in the box. So there's no having to organize it. You take all the labor out of it.
Exactly. So that the post office will share that savings with you in the form of a postage discount.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. So the one thing to make sure people understand here is qualification for that discount, that rate is based off of hitting a certain saturation point for a given carrier route. So for the route that your mail carrier walks along, and so that can potentially, depending on what you're targeting, for example, let's say you're targeting a congressional district, you may have a carrier route where that carrier walks in and out of that district as they're delivering. So if you're filtering and selecting a carrier district or a district, what may happen is you may have some routes that completely qualify for saturation, and then you may have others that don't, just because maybe they only hit a fringe of that district, and so there isn't enough mail there to qualify for.
It's never easy, is it, Bob?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because it never aligns with when you have congressional districts and how a carrier walks. They're completely unrelated pieces of data, but the software has the ability to look at that and essentially do the right thing.
Right, exactly. And so if you're looking for software, definitely you want to make sure that you're selecting a software that's going to do the right thing, right? That's going to apply the correct rates, because otherwise the post office is going to catch you. So you want to look for PAVE certified software. So PAVE, kind of like the CAS certified software, is a certification that we go through with the post office just to make sure that we are sorting things properly and that they're going to be able to accept your mail.
And we are PAVE certified as well.
Indeed, for many years. Yep. So after you've sorted everything and everything's clean and you've got your list and everything's ready to go, the next thing you need to look at is printing.
So just to jump back, sorry, if we can jump back to the previous
Oh.
slide, just to call out that bottom right corner here. This is where in the software you're going to be identifying whether it's an election mail, a political mail, and this actually will drive the information that goes into the electronic documentation
Exactly.
and then ultimately shows up on that postage statement that we were talking about earlier.
That's how that checkbox gets checked.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so you'll definitely want to look for a software package that allows you to select those options so that all of your paperwork is correctly formatted and correctly filled out there. So once you're ready to start printing your mail pieces, obviously you're going to want to pay attention to where you put any of the additional information. So for example, if you're doing election mail, you want to make sure that's placed appropriately on your mail piece. If you're doing a campaign mailing, sometimes depending on where you're at, there's requirements about what you print and where. So you might say that this was paid for by the committee to elect whoever,
Bob Shimmick.
The committee to elect Bob Shimmick. And so you might have some specific verbiage that's actually required on the outside of the mail piece. So you'll want to make sure that that's included there. Things to kind of think about when you're thinking about printing. Variable data and color can really capture attention. So here on this mail piece, I've actually specifically called out the county. So you can, depending on your software, if you have that county information available, which we can apply using Satori Software, then you can specifically target that county, and it kind of gives that little bit of personalization to encourage that customer to open up that mail piece or to look at that postcard. You're going to want to look at software that is going to work seamlessly with your address printer. So if you have an on-site address printer, you want to make sure that everything's going to work really well with that. We actually partner with several different printers that are available in the United States, and we actually have specific drivers that we've written for different addressing printers that make sure that printing process works seamlessly. So you'll want to make sure that that's going to work out.
We've got everything we need to elect Bob.
There you go.
We could actually do this.
Yeah. And if you've sorted your mail using Full Service, which is the new barcode that the post office has available, you can actually use the barcode that's printed on the mail piece to track your mail. So you can actually take that information, and especially if you're a mail house and you're producing mail for different areas, sometimes different campaign managers can get a little antsy about, okay, when is this gonna, you always want to know where your mail is.
So you're saying that if I do a carefully targeted mail, that then I can see when those pieces start to hit.
Exactly, and then maybe you want to follow up with a phone call or a door-to-door campaign, and just to kind of follow up on what exactly is happening. And of course, you always want to make sure that all this mail is delivered before Election Day. That's one of the main things. You want to make sure that everything's delivered before Election Day, because once Election Day is over, there's really not much you can do. So making sure that you track that mail can be a really, really important thing.
Nothing worse than getting the sale flyer after the sale.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Election mail does no good after the election.
Yeah, exactly.
And one other thing, getting that confirmation that the mail piece has been delivered can also be used to trigger other events in your overall campaign, maybe following it up, for example, with an email message.
An email, or that you intrigued me with the phone call, because you could have a panel of people standing by, and when these mails started to hit, you could then call and say, hey, I know that you received our mail. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the things we said in there. So personal touch for the folks that have gotten that piece.
That's right. Yeah, and that can be a really effective way of getting your message out.
Yeah,
for sure.
All right, so next steps. All right, so I'm a campaign manager. I'm trying to get Bob Shimmick elected to public office, and I've got my mailings figured out. I know what I want to do. I've got a strategy. I've got my lists, and now I need to go forward. Best thing I can do is
contact an expert. So definitely, here at Satori Software, we want to encourage that everyone who's, has a message that they want to get out, that they be able to do so effectively and easily. So we have quite a few experts here on staff, and you can contact our sales department. They can look through what your options are, what your volume is, and what your needs are, and find a solution that's right for you.
And I will mention in there, we've mentioned this in previous webinars, but it really does hold true. Our sales department they have some good ethics about them. And so as a result, if you call and you say, I'm exploring my options, I'm kind of curious about whether this is the right thing for me, they're going to help you figure out what works. They're not going to try to sell you something you don't need. So here's $100 million product and they're not going to do that. Instead, they're going to take a look and say, well, how much volume have you got? What are you trying to do with it? How carefully do you want to target? Which features do you want to target upon? That whole, do I want to append this? Do I want to filter that? There's various different packages that they can put together. And so you're going to end up with just what you need to accomplish some of the cool things that Kim and Bob have talked about here.
Right.
Bob, final thoughts here before we put you out on the campaign trail?
No, I think we'll be ready to go and support this next election season. So,
never a dull moment in mailing, is there, Bob?
There never is, no.
On behalf of everyone here at Satori Software, I would like to thank our presenters for speaking today. Bob Shimmick, of course, Senior Director of Postal Affairs for Satori Software and host of our Postal Affair program on Monday mornings. Thank you for coming in. Appreciate you actually being in the studio.
Yeah, nice change of pace.
Kind of cool to not have you dial in.
Right, exactly.
And Kim Mock, Senior Product Manager, of course, the one who owns our bulk mailer line and several of our mailing products. It's always great to have you in as a you are our expert.
Thanks, Rob.
Good to have you in. We'd also like to thank everybody who tuned in today. We appreciate your time, and we do appreciate that. We like it when you tune in. I'm Rob Parent, Director of Multimedia Marketing, and once again, we would like to thank you on behalf of everyone at Satori Software for tuning in, and we'd like to wish you smooth mailing ahead.